Hi.
Hi.
How are
my
you?
God, so nice to see you.
Hi, Mrs. Trifid.
Hi, I'm Terry.
How are you? I think I'm okay.
God has
Yeah.
been merciful.
You know what?
Under his
I am. Anyway, thank you for having us. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and for allowing to share your experiences from attending the Twitter space on the mental health experiences of journalists and content creators.
happy to.
Not just, I mean, you're a mental health advocate, right? But you're also a student of journalism.
Been there 4 years.
Yeah. So I not only am I glad that you attended the space, but I'm also very excited to hear from your experience of that, from your views, from your thoughts, and So on Thursday, 8th December, which was last week, I had the pleasure of hosting. Sime Tutu. I'm tired, Sime. Had the pleasure of hosting this Twitter space through Andrea Magazine's account, and of course the space had been planned for 2 hours, but as life happens, the internet, right? Anyway, the internet will be the internet, and we ended up having a conversation for 1.5 hours. And on this Twitter space, journalists shared their personal lived experiences, mental health experiences from professionally working during the pandemic and of course post the pandemic, but we got to see how the pandemic was from a journalist's perspective. I shared too as a freelance journalist, as a host, yes, but also as a freelance journalist. We also had insights from Sarah William Misho, who is a Ugandan multimedia journalist and also an owner of the UG Post, another media online space. We also had insights from Zainab Muhammad from Kenya, a multimedia broadcast journalist from Kenya. And to be honest, I think for me it was not just as a journalist and as a student of mental health, it was a worthwhile experience for me to host this space. And especially because these guys got very honest and vulnerable and candid about the realities of what happened during the pandemic. When the COVID-19 pandemic came, when the world stopped, journalists and content creators had to keep the world connected, right? Information had to be going. We were all locked up in our houses and you needed to know what's happening outside. So journalists had to go out and still find that information. But all the while, COVID is happening, cases are piling up, the Ministry of Health cases are coming up, but they still have to report on these things. In fact, Zainab, I remember, said, like, they would go to the Ministry of Health in Kenya and, you hear these statistics. And, of course, you're going back, you're reporting on these statistics, but these are statistics of actual human beings who have been affected, who have lost their lives to COVID-19. And as a human being, you're also present in the world that is experiencing COVID-19. So you're scared. And remember she said she was scared to, like, even go home. Because you're like...
Is she the one who didn't want to come home, because she had a vulnerable mother?
No, that's Sarah. Zainab was living with her sister, but still, when you get home, I mean, who is to say you're not infected and you're not going to infect your sister, right? So there's already that anxiety, but all the while you still have to go out and report. And I remember she said that there are certain journalists who succumbed to suicide in Kenya because the work was just, the pressures were just like, no, we're not doing this. And also they were losing their own personal people. She said she lost some of her personal people, some of her family members during the time, but she's still reporting on this. But Zainab told us that at least for her, she was able to find a support system in her family, in her sister, so that whereby she would go home and vent, and then tomorrow, you go back after having your couch time with your sister. But Sarah, the one you're talking about, the one who had a sick mother at home, did not really have that because, of course, your mom is sick, your family is looking to you, you're now home, and she had been a field journalist. Like, she would go out in the field to get the stories, but now she was working from home, restrictions were on, she couldn't move, unless, I mean, if journalists could move, but unless you have a car, you're not really going anywhere.
Or attached to a media house or something.
Exactly. You're not really going anywhere. So she didn't find that space of venting until, in fact, she said that at some point she stopped writing. She gave it all up, the journalism, and was like, you know what, farming, here we come. Until later she was able to have a session with an online counselor and get it all out, and then reaffirm her motivations in being a journalist now, having to switch from, you know how, like, you go in the field, if you want a story from a source, you will look for them and look for them and look for them. But here you're working from home, you can't move. So reaching sources online virtually was a transition for her that she had to get into. Remember how she scheduled a call with someone at
4 p.m.
Exactly
4 p.m.
And if she didn't do the 4 p.m.,
then you are not getting that interview.
you're out.
Yeah.
Anyway, about
Tricky times.
right? You're like on top of a tree. Guys, like, I'm on top of a tree at 4 p.m.
Yep.
Find me there, or we leave the story. But you need the story. You're a journalist. But for you, what was your takeaway from this space?
Well, I have done the journalism school. I am not a practicing journalist. And from this space, my thought was, thank God I'm not a journalist. Because this sounded like so much suffering. Already we are in our homes, we are scared. We're all scared for our lives, but I have to go out there and risk my life just to get some information. I was like, no, I am so glad I do not have to do that. And then I have to chase people for an interview.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot even now chase physically. I have to call you and harass you, and it's so very easy for someone to ignore your calls.
Oh yeah. I can be like, who is going?
Yeah.
Not now.
So from this space, I realized that this is hard work. You guys are very strong. This is really hard work.
And you see that challenge also is, and I think Sarah and also Zainab touched on this, is even in the newsrooms, there's no mental health support.
Yeah, she said this thing where they will send you to report on a rapist and you're a rape victim, and this thing triggers you, but you can't even say no, because if you say no, then you don't have a job anymore. My
You're being a
gosh.
sensitive journalist.
Yeah. I thought to myself I would take this thing and be like, I will go and be objective, but there are some topics that you feel strongly about that the objectivity would just fly out of the window.
Yeah.
So
I mean that expectation on journalists to go out there
I'm human.
right? Especially, like, remember during the pandemic, we were all human beings being faced with the fatalities of COVID-19. But you're asking journalists to go report. Someone has probably lost their next of kin. But you're like, well, now you have to go report on the cases that are coming
As a
up.
matter of fact, add your next of kin in
Oh,
the
no.
statistics.
Oh, God.
Yeah. I do not envy you guys.
Well, I think for me as a freelance journalist, at least for me, I think and this is from my takeaway, Sarah talked something about this, because while the newsrooms don't have mental health support, like to find they have an actual counselor, the relationship between the seniors and the juniors is also very problematic, like between editors and the reporters, and even between the colleagues. So either colleagues are competing and they won't share amongst themselves and be like, guys, I'm struggling. Or the reporter won't even have that conversation with their editor to be like, life is really bad right now. I need a break. I need a mental health break. And for me, of course, I was lucky because I had editors. Sarah was one of them. The co-founder of Andrea magazine, Omnia, was also one of them. I had editors who allowed me the time during the pandemic to be like, if it's hard, it's okay. Breathe and resume.
That was really nice.
Right? I have had a different experience, to be honest. But of course, I've also had the experience of being a freelance journalist,
Yep.
where unless you work, you will not eat. If you do not report a story,
So you have to.
exactly, regardless of how you feel about the story, you still have to go in and do it, or else you won't eat, you won't pay rent.
Yeah.
And that's also another challenge, of course, with freelance journalism, where you're not really attached to anyone, so you're dependent on yourself, on being able to take this task on yourself as a journalist. Anyway, what was your surviving sentiment? Like, of all the things that happened in this space?
I will repeat. Thank God I am not a journalist because I could not do this. I really honestly could not do this. Oh my God. Being attached to a media house. Yeah, they are going to send me out there whether I like it or not. Being freelance, do I have the drive to send myself out there into a war zone? No, I do not. So
Yeah.
thank God I am not a journalist. Yeah.
I think I remember Sarah quit. I can understand it, honestly. I can genuinely understand it. And I think for me, what has helped with not getting to that sentiment has been allowing myself, first of all, to learn, to be like, okay, I don't know how to do this. Let me see if I can learn to do this. And we talked about this, about how, like, we went to school, right? We went to journalism school, but you come out, you don't know how to do some of the things that also increases your anxiety. You're like, but really, who even says I'm a journalist?
Right.
What am I even doing here? And all the while, remember, you have editors and colleagues who are not particularly helping. So I think finding learning spaces for me has been a way to keep it going, and also having editors that I can talk to and be like, guys, chili
Sad
movie.
note here.
It's sad. So that for me was my surviving sentiment is COVID was a test on journalists and content creators, because you had to keep the world connected. The fourth estate had to keep life going. I know, remember the fourth estate was. But I think dealing with those circumstances needed someone to reaffirm their motivations in, why are you doing this work? And can you find a way to do this work and still be able to pay attention to your mental health needs as a human being, but also as a journalist, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Aside from feeding, why do you do this work?
aside from feeding, aside from needing why do I do this work? I think I like, and Sarah touched on this, is for people to say their stories. I like to be able to have human beings communicate what they're feeling and what their realities are. So I go out there, I listen to people's stories, I consume them, but also allow them and give them the space to say their lived reality. So that for me is my motivation. I will keep you posted when that motivation changes. When I also decide, I'm like, no. But for now, that's still my motivation.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Well, thank you for
Thank you for having me.
chatting with us, chatting with me, and sharing your sentiments. And thank you for attending the space.
Thank you for always hosting these amazing spaces, by the way. Very insightful.
Thank you. Mental health is. I want to listen to individuals about their lived experiences. Thank you. So,